Tēnā koutou katoa, ko Dan toko ingoa. Good evening, everyone. My name's Dan, and as Anne said, I've just recently moved from New Zealand. I work as an ecologist for an ecological consultancy called Wildlife Management International. I'm continuing to work for them remotely while I settle in Victoria. I moved 2 months ago, so still just sort of settling in and trying to find work here. I've worked extensively for Wildlife Management International doing seabird and conservation and research out there for quite a number of years now. And yeah, it's really awesome to be able to have this opportunity to talk about the New Zealand Bird Atlas. Because as part of my role, I got to work as part of the team coordinating the atlas on behalf of Birds New Zealand. Before I start, obviously, I just wanted to acknowledge that we are gathering here today on Kawangan people's lands and just acknowledging their stewardship. I have a lot to learn about all of this, and so I'm hoping to learn more probably from many of you as well, and through work and advocating for reconciliation for the colonization in the past. That's a similar vein from coming from Aotearoa, New Zealand. And I would like to acknowledge tangata whenua, or the people of the land from there, and their stewardship there, because Wildlife Management International doing seabird and conservation and research out there for quite a number of years now. And yeah, it's really awesome to be able to have this opportunity to talk about the New Zealand Bird Atlas. Because as part of my role, I got to work as part of the team coordinating the atlas on behalf of Birds New Zealand. Before I start, obviously, I just wanted to acknowledge that we are gathering here today on Kawangan people's lands and just acknowledging their stewardship. I have a lot to learn about all of this, and so I'm hoping to learn more probably from many of you as well, and through work and advocating for reconciliation for the colonization in the past. That's a similar vein from coming from Aotearoa, New Zealand. And I would like to acknowledge tangata whenua, or the people of the land from there, and their stewardship there, because I'm going to be talking about the Atlas Project and Aotearoa New Zealand. Aotearoa is the te reo Māori name for New Zealand, and talking about a lot of taonga species, which are treasured species, manu or birds. They hold a huge cultural significance out there. They're really close to many people's hearts, including mine, because I called New Zealand home for many years. And so it's a real privilege to be able to talk about this because the Atlas only just recently finished. As Anne said, if you have any questions, that's including people tuning in from Zoom, please feel free to just put up your hand and interrupt. I don't necessarily want it to feel like a super formal presentation, because it's meant to be a chance to ask questions and discussion. And you might have some really interesting discussions, because it's the first time I've presented on this outside of Aotearoa, New Zealand. So yeah, by all means, this is a slightly different audience than I'm used to. So hopefully everyone can hear the kore mako, or bellbird. So I'll be saying the common te reo Māori name for each bird, and then the common English name as well. Aotearoa, New Zealand is a beautiful country, and it is full of some absolutely stunning species as well. Because of its geological isolation, there's been some really intriguing and very interesting evolution over time. And so you have this high amount of endemism of species there, where they're found nowhere else and breed nowhere else in the world. And particularly with New Zealand species, you have a lot of flightless species. So there's quite a few enigmatic species, like, of course, kiwi. This is kiwi puku, little spotted kiwi. Nocturnal, flightless, has vestigial wings, just everything about it, particularly even the feathers, just don't strike the normal sort of bird picture. Very enigmatic species such as kia, which are these very cheeky, full of character parrots that have been pushed up into the alpine zone. Very clever. They've seen like videos of them tobogganing and slaying down roofs in the mountains. Tarapurohe, black-fronted tern, endemic shorebirds that are found nowhere else and breed on the beautiful braided rivers. Myself and my colleagues, we've done quite a bit of work with this species. And New Zealand is renowned globally for its seabirds as well. So quite a few endemic species. This is kākāpō black petrels. And again, got the privilege of working on this species on their breeding grounds and at sea. Just really, really awesome space for so many different species and some of the largest species in the world as well. Toroa, so albatross here, pictured, and just really accessible just offshore, and breed nowhere else in the world. And so it's a very special place. And this is New Zealand storm petrel, which was presumed extinct in 2003, before 2003, where it was rediscovered. And it's a tiny, tiny seabird that was found breeding on Aotearoa, Little Barrier Island. And since then, there's been some amazing work to discover where it's been breeding and learn more about the species and try and increase the population. And speaking of famously coming back from the dead almost, South Island Takahe, famously rediscovered in the Murchison Mountains after being presumed extinct in the 1900s. And since then, there's been, again, some amazing and dedicated people working on recovering these species and trying to bring them back and trying to save them from extinction. And so that's one of the biggest messages here is that I'm not going to sugarcoat it. The picture for New Zealand's land birds and seabirds is pretty grim. Up to 80% of native land birds are at risk of extinction. That's from the Parliamentary Commission for the Environment's relatively recent report. So in layman's terms, 4 out of 5 species are either on the precipice, approaching, or recovering from being at risk of extinction. So there's a lot of work to be done. And as I said, because of the cultural significance, but also because of the ecological significance of a lot of these species, we need up-to-date information. And lots of these species have been or are continuing to be pushed to extinction because of a variety of threats. This is by no means an exhaustive list. These are just sort of some key ones. So ourselves, people, and we cause disturbance, particularly vehicles driving on breeding areas along the coast or braided rivers in Aotearoa. Habitat loss from agriculture expansion, development, again, linking in with habitat loss, particularly urban and coastal development, pollution, notably plastic of late, invasive weeds choking up breeding rivers, and resource extraction on rivers as well. But one of the biggest threats is invasive species, but introduced species, introduced mammalian predators are a major, major cause of species either being at risk or having gone extinct in Aotearoa, New Zealand. Rats, mice, rabbit hares, common brush-tailed possums, mustelids like stoats, weasels, ferrets, dogs, both domestic and feral, European hedgehogs, and domestic and feral cats. They've all been introduced since humans arrived, and they've all caused a lot of problems for species. This isn't necessarily unique to New Zealand. It's quite a big issue for island nations, where there's a lot of endemism. And as I mentioned, the history and isolation of Aotearoa New Zealand meant that a lot of birds that became flightless, they dealt with aerial avian predators. And so mammalian predators being introduced, they've been literally sitting ducks. And so there's a lot of work, including work that I've done on these species and trying to either suppress and trap and kill these predators or eliminate them entirely. And so the consultancy that I work for, Wildlife Management, we do international eradications for these species globally as well. My boss, Biz Bell, she's a global leader in international eradications. And it's really important. Remove these species and you'd be amazed how much, if you give it a chance, particularly birds will come back. And I would be remiss without saying this is all interacting, climate change is interacting with all of these. Anthropogenic, so human-induced climate changes is influencing a lot of this as well and causing a lot of issues that we're still yet to uncover. And so how can an atlas help? So New Zealand Bird Atlas, how can that help? Well, we need up-to-date and scientifically valuable information to contribute to our advances in science and our knowledge of birds. We know that birds are really good indicators of ecosystem health, and we know that atlases can have lasting and positive impacts on bird conservation management research and policy, which is a win-win-win. And that data can be really valuable to a lot of different stakeholders. And so the New Zealand Bird Atlas is, as far as we're aware, it's one of the largest community science or citizen science projects in Aotearoa, New Zealand. And it ran for 5 years, from the 1st of June 2019 to 2024 of this year. And it's Birds New Zealand's flagship project. Birds New Zealand is the informal name for the Ornithological Society of New Zealand, Te Kahu Matai Manu o Aotearoa. And myself and 3 of my colleagues from Wildlife Management, we coordinated the project on behalf of Birds New Zealand. We're all Birds New Zealand members as well. But what was really awesome with this one is we did it in partnership with eBird, and so the Cornell Lab of Ornithology, and it made it a digital first New Zealand Bird Atlas, which was really exciting, and has just been a massive boost to the whole project's legacy. And so this is just a bit of a timeline, because this atlas isn't the first atlas, this is the third. And so the first one was way back in 1969 and actually ran for 10 years. It was really cutting edge for its time, and it was inspired by the British flora and fauna atlases that were sort of started in the 1950s, I believe. The second one was 20 years later at the turn of millennium, and this one was 20 years later again, 2019. We hope that the 4th New Zealand Bird Atlas project isn't going to be another 20 years from now, because we just know that so much happens in 20 years and a lot can change. We need to keep up to date as quickly as we can to be able to keep informed and make good decisions, informed decisions to help species. Just a broad definition of what an atlas is. An atlas is aiming essentially to map the distributions of species within a set location over a set period of time, usually years. And they utilize these grid systems to document presence or absence. That's at its most basic form. Obviously, there's lots of other definitions and lots of different ways to do it. Our atlas had over 3,232 of those grid squares, and each of those was 10 by 10 kilometers. And it was across the whole country, North, South Island, Whakakiora, Stewart Island down at the south there. You also notice the Chatham Islands over on the east. They've been nudged in, they're not really that close. And on that map is not, I haven't been able to show the sub-Antarctic islands. So that was also included in the proposed effort of where we needed to get observations from. So Auckland Islands, Antipodes, the Snares, as well as north to the Kermadec as well. If any of you have been or are planning to go to New Zealand, if you can go to the sub-Antarctics, you might have to sell a kidney to be able to go down. But I highly recommend you go do it. I haven't done it, but my friends and colleagues have gone. And wow, it's just like a step back in time by the looks of it. So by no means a small feat, trying to cover the whole country, trying to light up the whole country with bird observations, essentially trying to fill in those gaps. And we had different seasons. So we had cumulative winter, spring, summer, and autumn. For those of you looking at that, getting slightly confused, of course, remember, New Zealand's in the southern hemisphere. So June, August is not summertime, it's winter time. So my colleagues are sort of taking the mick out of me complaining about the wet and cold at the minute, because it's beautiful sunshine and hot there at the minute. But we had these seasons, and that was to help to try and recommend and encourage participants to go to places throughout the year to capture those known changes in bird distribution, diversity, abundance, all of that good stuff that we just knew that was out there to capture. At its most basic level, the aim of every single participant was to try and detect or observe all of the possible species within each grid square across all of those 4 seasons. Nice and simple. I've put those 4 species pictured there just to kind of highlight some of the things, again, that we were encouraging participants to remember and to try and target. So tarapuka, black-billed gull on the left-hand side. It's a braided river breeder. So all along the South Island, there's these pretty impressive braided river systems, and they're really important shorebird breeding areas. And black-billed gulls breed there, but then afterwards they're quite dispersive, so they don't necessarily have a set migration route. And so trying to capture all of that for that particular species is really important throughout the years. Korora, little penguin, the smallest penguin species in the world. They are very, very cute. Again, if you go, I can make some recommendations as to where best to see them. And I've had the privilege of working with them, but they're very active at night and along the coast but they can travel really far inland. There's been reports in Wellington City of them being found across the street and underneath the fish and chip shop. So they're really good at living alongside or dealing with human development. But again, encouraging birders to go out at night and try and find these species. We have a huge bias towards daytime, whereas nocturnal observations are really valuable. Piwawa rock wren there, very fragmented, alpine specialist. And so again, recommending people and trying to encourage people to go out and try and detect these species. And finally, Nutipare wrybill on the right-hand side there, an endemic shorebird species, again, a braided river specialist that does have this known migration route and stopover points. And so again, trying to capture all that information. With the wrybill, you'll notice that the beak is bent to the right. It's always to the right, which is really cool. And they use that to flick up stones and get invertebrates from these fast-flowing rivers and areas. So yeah, really, really cool. So trying to encourage participants to sort of take all of that into consideration. And as I said, we collaborated with eBird, which is, as many of you probably know, a wonderful resource. It's a free global resource for birders across the globe, and it is just such a valuable tool for an atlas and for gathering bird observations. But what was even really, really cool was that we got a specific bird atlas portal built for the project. And that had some specific extras, some bonus tools for us and the participants to be able to use to better be successful at the project. As many of you know, eBird utilizes an app, which again, I know so much is on our phones these days, but it is a wonderful resource to be able to encourage people to use that as the primary data collection piece. And it's just in your pocket. You can press start and stop, and it just gives you so much information. The reasons that we use eBird and encourage people to use the app as the primary means to collect information, I'll talk about in a bit. But that all syncs via the cloud and updates regularly. And this was a far cry from the last atlas of the 10th millennium, which was all paper records. And they only received updates about the project every, I want to say like 3 to 6 months. So it was a long time, whereas this was providing really awesome updates. And one of the most amazing tools was the effort map. So this is showing the whole grid across the country. And each of those grids is the 10 by 10 kilometer grid squares, sorry. And this is showing diurnal, so daytime effort hours across the country. And this updated every day to show how much effort went in. And so the dark areas are population centers. So of course, more people, more observations, but it's clearly showing you where there's been no diurnal effort at that point. This was a snapshot years ago. What was amazing was also being able to see nocturnal effort. So again, encouraging people to be going out and saying like, there's huge gaps along this coast. We really encourage you to go out and go and get some nocturnal observations if you can. And that was really valuable for honing in onto areas. So this is showing Taranaki in one instance and the winter effort. Again, just being able to look at an area and use the drop downs and tailor that to your atlasing was super valuable. Being able to look at like diurnal, how that compared to the nocturnal effort hours, the number of checklists, and the number of species. So such a valuable tool for being able to pick apart different pictures and different perspectives for the participants. And it was all freely available online for them to use. What was really valuable as well was that species maps, like this one for Ruru Moport, which is a native owl species, was also available. So someone could go, who lived in Taranaki maybe, could look and say, well, I know that they're in that patch of bush or forest, but no one's detected them yet. So I'm going to go out. I'll go out and try and get some observations. So such a valuable tool for such a nationally significant project. Like I said, we used eBird and we recommended the app as the primary means of data collection, and that was for quite a few reasons, which I'll kind of go into. But it's just such an amazing piece of technology when you think about it. I've been doing ecology field work for probably a decade now, and even the advances over that time has been really staggering. You know, used to use like GPS, compass, watch, data sheets, and then have to go back and enter it all. And now with eBird, you know, you can go out and do surveys and enter it all there. And then once you're back into service, just upload it. It's really, really valuable. And eBird uses this really effective and simple yet scientific framework to gather information on what birds were seen or heard. So this is just showing a checklist from mine a while ago, and when they were seen or heard. So obviously date, time. This is all super valuable information. Where they were seen or heard, so GPS location. But this is the kicker, and it's how much effort has gone into those observations. This is what kind of sets eBird apart from other community science tools, and this is what's really valuable for cutting edge outputs like relative abundance modeling, which I'll talk about in a bit, which is something that we're really excited about because we're currently going through and reviewing the data and writing up the project. And some of the things that this modeling has been able to show us is pretty exciting. You might be thinking, okay, cool. So you've got this massive grid, you're encouraging birders and participants to volunteer and go across the whole country and gather observations. How are you like checking the data quality of that? And again, we lent into eBird's reactionary approach, which is through the app and online. When you click start on the app or when you enter your location online, it presents you with a likely list of birds that you are likely to see at that time of year and location. And those in the background are based on what's called checklist filters. And they're developed by knowledgeable bird experts around the world. So there's one, and there'll be volunteer eBird reviewers here in Victoria. And we've got a small voluntary team in New Zealand that manage these filters and make sure that they are kept up to date. And myself and the rest of the Atlas team, we were also volunteer reviewers. And all it does is basically when unusual birds are seen or a high count is reported, it triggers the filter, asks the observer for more information. Ideally, they'd be writing really nice notes about how they've identified that species, particularly compared to similar looking species. They've uploaded a photo or audio, all of that stuff. And then it goes to a regional reviewer to assess that and accept it or not. So we lent into that. This is by no means a perfect system. As you can imagine, some things do slip through the filters. And so with that, we wanted to be proactive. And so we did a lot of advocacy with participants and for the project, that when you were submitting your observations to the project, we wanted you to take these, what we called Atlas Essentials, or golden rules, or best practices, whatever you want to call them, to heart. And this was all to rapidly increase the scientific value of people's observations. The first one was submitting to the Atlas portal so that it went into tools like the Atlas Effort Map and updated so that we could see where people were going. That was really valuable for the participants, the community, but also us as a coordination team to be like, okay, well, there's gaps here. We need to encouraging people here. Complete checklists was the second one. And that is just a complete checklist is listing everything that you personally are able to identify by sight and or sound without intentionally leaving anything off. And so a big thing was put in the introduced species, the house sparrows, the feral rock pigeons. We need that data, complete picture around everything that you're seeing and hearing. And, you know, encouraging people to remember that if you can't necessarily identify that gull species right down to the exact species, like black-billed gull, you can just put gull spur or use the slashes or the spur options. They're still super valuable and it can be really, really good. And so that was a big part. Time and distance are another thing, so increasing the resolution of those checklists over space and time. So the example that I usually give is imagine that you were walking, say 12 kilometers from a beach all the way back home in the suburbs or urban areas. Rather than doing one long checklist, what we were encouraging people was to increase the resolution of that. So splitting them into roughly, say, 1 kilometer, 1.5 kilometer sections. And if you, say, sat on that beach for hours and hours and hours, is splitting it into hour chunks just to increase that resolution. For the traveling checklist, if you can imagine, you know, you've got species that are associated with the beach or out at sea. Then as you move through the dunes, go through maybe some bush or some forested areas into the suburbs and then urban areas. What you're doing by splitting those counts is helping to split and associate different species with different habitats. And also a big thing was trying not to cross over those grid square boundaries. Accurate counts was something as well, so encouraging people to not put X. So if you have a gull colony, for instance, not just putting X that the species was present. This was a big change from the last atlas, but trying to give a best estimate or accurate count for how many gulls you were seeing. And again, we weren't expecting people to count every 2,536 of them, but if you could say, well, I think there's 2,400 or there's 3,000, that was so much better than just putting an X. And that seasonal effort was a big thing as well. And the final one, have fun, might seem a bit trivial, but honestly, this was such an exciting project. It was a big, exciting challenge that we wanted people to get really pumped up about. And there was so much freedom to how you could go out on Atlas. You could, how much time you spent out, when you went out, who you went with, and we wanted that to be really fun. And we did a lot of extra things as well, which I'll talk about to try and increase the sort of enjoyment of the Atlas project. Now, the project started June 2019, and then pretty quickly after that hit its first major hurdle, which was COVID. By April of the following year, so April 2020, I believe it was, we were in national lockdowns, and suddenly people couldn't travel, and it was a very unnerving, very scary, very grim time, a very unclear time. We didn't know at what point we would be able to travel again. Obviously, we tried to encourage people to be sensible when they went out and still collect observations in their back garden, but we were certainly a bit worried. But we knew that our worries and issues were very small compared to a lot of people and what they were going through. And so, similar to what we're doing this evening, we went into what everyone got involved with, which was Zoom. And we thought, we'll maybe run a webinar and see if people just want to chat through and go through the methods. And so we published that we were going to do a webinar, and we maybe expected 15 to 20 people who were, super keen and wanting to chat. We ended up doing 4, and over 100 people attended each one. We were just blown away by the participation, and I think it was because people really latched on to wanting to reconnect and connect with people online and feel like they were part of something, but I think also re-engaging with nature. Bird watching globally, not just in Aotearoa New Zealand, but it just seemed to be something that resonated with people. It was something that was a really easy means to connect with nature. And it's something that I know lots of people love doing and have continued to love doing post-COVID. So we're really blown away by that, and these have proved really valuable after the fact as well as training material, because they're all available on YouTube. You can watch them back. As Anne was joking, there's people's kitchens, there's our spare rooms in the background, and we're going through stuff and just trying to navigate Zoom. And I should be a pro. I should have known all the things at the beginning, but still struggling to share my screen. We also, as I said, we wanted to make it fun. So we ran challenges. We engaged with local businesses, publishers, authors, the Cornell Birds of the World, Bird Academy, all sorts, to try and set these challenges for people that would encourage people to maybe go out at night or need to go to certain areas or certain grid squares, search for certain species, particularly cryptic species. And you could, by doing that and entering your observations, you could put your hat in to win a prize. And people loved them, and they really, really helped, I think, again, sort of make it fun and engage people, as well as raising the profile for some really awesome organizations and artists and authors as well. We did a lot of advocacy through, the classic means, social media, and the Bird Atlas portal news page, and continually advocating to try and reach beyond Birds New Zealand members, essentially try and reach the public who might be engaged, local iwi, Indigenous groups, community groups, or anybody who had an interest and wanted to participate. We did extra webinars online with different organizations. We wrote magazine articles in outdoor magazines. We just tried to advocate constantly for people to understand the importance of this project and how easy it was for people to actually get involved. You didn't necessarily have to be an ornithologist or an expert birder to contribute. We still needed everyone and anyone who could help us. We also worked with a variety of organizations, including the Government Department of Conservation, Te Papa Atawhai, as well as regional councils, Otago Regional Council, Environment Canterbury, and Environment Southland I've put there because they were really key ones for uploading their regional terrestrial biodiversity monitoring. So they undertake bird counts as part of their work, and we worked with them and encouraged them to upload it to the Atlas portal. And I'm pleased to say that they are continuing to upload their data to eBird after the Atlas is finished as well. And the Department of Conservation, or DOC, they also undertake, across the whole conservation land that they manage, they undertake bird counts as well. So we were super stoked to work with them and get them to upload their bird counts, because it was in some really hard to reach spots, like helicopter access only kind of thing. And obviously, you know, volunteers don't necessarily have those means. And so that really helped us to increase the coverage in grid squares, number of checklists going in, effort hours, and number of species as well. So that was a really successful collaboration with them. And we also had the eBird team come out to Aotearoa, New Zealand. So I was working with Ian Davies and Tom Auer from the eBird team, and we built up a really good relationship via Zoom, because they were really supportive of the project. And they ended up coming out in December of last year, and we ran a series of workshops around the country, just going through the atlas, also eBird, the power of eBird, and Merlin, and also talking about status and trends and relative abundance. And it was small venues like this to bigger venues, and it was just really awesome, I think, not only for the eBird team to meet more of the community there, but for the community to sort of see how their observations were making a difference, not just for the atlas, but wider as well within the eBird sort of ecosystem. And that was awesome. We also received some funding from a winery to run some targeted expeditions over the final 2 years. And so essentially looking at areas that hadn't had a lot of effort and gathering a group of people to go there and just bird day and night and just gather observations and fill in gaps. And these are a couple of the maps from the Gisborne expedition, which is on the northeast area of the North Island, as well as the Wairarapa region here, which is southeast of the North Island. And just basically doing a birding blitz. They were really good fun. I got to go on a couple, and they're just awesome for not only just being able to bird day and night, but meeting people and going out with different people that you wouldn't necessarily have met otherwise. So how did we do? How did the community do? These are just the cursory stats since the project finished, and we're still, as I said, reviewing the data and going through it, but nearly 500,000 checklists were submitted to the New Zealand Bird Atlas portal, which is pretty staggering. It's only 100,000 to a very small country with a very, very small birding community, in all honesty. And they documented 314 species. That includes endemics, natives, introduced species, migratory species, and vagrants. And over 1,700 people participated. And we had international birders. I contacted quite a few people to say, would you be willing to put your observations into the Atlas portal? And they were like, yeah, of course, that'd be awesome, which was just such a boost. And the coverage was one of the most impressive things. So out of those 3,232 grid squares, we got 97.7% of those received data. Even if it was just 5 minutes, they received some data, which is pretty staggering, again, considering that it was the subantarctic islands and just everywhere, essentially. And the effort hours is something that I am super proud of the community for. Is over 145,000 effort hours have gone in, roughly, which equates to over 6,000 days effort. That's 3 times the actual day's length of the project, which is pretty incredible when you think about it. I think it's really important to also note with that effort, if we were to pay that out at New Zealand living wage, just the birding, it would be nearly $3.5 million. And really important to consider, this was during COVID. That doesn't cover people's time traveling, the cost of traveling, and the cost of fuel. What the community also navigated was a cost of living crisis. The fuel prices went through the roof, food was increasing in price, but people just latched on. They're still so dedicated, so passionate, just wanted to go out, wanted to help. And yeah, we were just so overwhelmed and just so proud of the community for navigating that. In terms of the top 4 most ubiquitous or widespread species for the project, these are the 4. So Paharini, common chaffinch on the left-hand side, that was the most widespread species. That's an introduced passerine, unfortunately, but it's an awesome wee bird introduced from Europe in over 2,915 grid squares. Second to that was Manipango, so Eurasian blackbird, again an introduced passerine in 2,893 grid squares. And then Toho silveri, which is actually a self-introduced native. Toho means stranger in Te Reo Māori, when they first started turning up. And they were in over 2,800 grid squares as well. And then the first endemic species is the most ubiquitous endemic species, is the rerorero, so grey warbler, tiny wee passerine, and that was in over 2,860 grid squares. So there's far more to pull out and tease out from all of these results, obviously, but some really cool results so far. And what we can start to do is look at the previous atlas and understand and try and tease out how species are possibly tracking. Are they increasing in distribution? Are they decreasing? So on all of these, the left-hand side is the second atlas, so at the turn of the millennium. That's their produced maps for species distribution. And this is a screen grab from the species map for the atlas. So this is kiwi puka puka, little spotted kiwi, which I showed at the beginning. And a lot of conservation work has gone into the species, really dedicated professionals working on the species. And you can kind of see that there's a few sites down at south in Fiordland and kind of spreading more around the Wellington area, which is the south of the North Island. This is often a translocated species to remote predator-free islands. That's what it needs. So slowly possibly increasing, but we need to assess that and analyze that more. Takahe, this is a really lovely example over those 20 years. It is increasing, and what's exciting is that northwestern South Island point is Kaharangi National Park, and they've been released there wild. So they're not in a protective predator-proof fence. They're not on a remote island. They're actually out there and fending for themselves, which is super exciting. You can do hikes through that national park, and you'd be able to see banded Kākāpō, which is really cool. And I think most of them have names. That's how few there are. So really, really cool to be able to have a look at this already. We are seeing potential increases for species. This is a native species, pied shag. It's a cormorant in New Zealand. Cormorants are called shags. And so this is a species that we think potentially might be increasing in its distribution and breeding distribution, which is really super interesting. Self-introduced species, black-fronted dotterel, again, is doing really well and potentially looks like it increasing in its distribution. As I say, these are just cursory looks. We've got to do a lot more analysis, but it's really exciting to start pulling this stuff out. An introduced species, common myna, look like they are actually moving southwards, which is, and there's a few spots, if you can kind of see for those eagle-eyed, there's a few spots around Christchurch and Blenheim there on the South Island. And those are the first reported instances of them gunning across the Cook Strait, so onto the South Island. And this species is predicted to move south as a consequence of climate change, so warming. And it's not a very welcomed introduced species. It was introduced for pest control for agriculture, and it can be really bad for endemic species. Nesting species is quite aggressive and kicks them out. Miro, New Zealand tomtit, potentially, looking at these two, it's hard to tease out, and we're going to have to do more to kind of understand beyond just the simple distribution. Is it decreasing or increasing in relative abundance? And same here for kaka as well, which is an endemic species of parrot. So there's lots of work to sort of still tease out these, but just such a valuable data set. I did just want to show the coverage. So looking at the coverage of the last atlas, for its time, cutting edge, and they did such an amazing job finishing the project with 96.4% grid square coverage. But what I wanted to show is this project, which is on the right-hand side. From the off, over 3/4 of the grid squares received data in the first year, and then it just kept on going up in small increments towards the end. But as you can imagine, that was going into those really hard to reach spots, alpine areas, private land, and offshore areas as well. And this map is just showing areas that weren't covered. And quite a few of these are little segments of land, just the way that the grid ended up being overlaid. So actually, the community did really, really well, and lots of these could probably just be sort of merged with the nearby grid squares, and it's still a very impressive effort from all volunteers, just going out there and trying to cover the whole country and observations and trying to light up the country with observations. And so you'd be forgiven for looking at this and thinking that it's night pollution. It's actually every single checklist location across the whole country. And I haven't drawn outlines across the country. So that's how significant and how much effort went across the whole country. And there's not very many gaps. And what's also super exciting is, covering everything from the coast way up to the mountain areas, but also venturing out into the marine space. And that's certainly the next frontier, notably because of Aotearoa New Zealand's importance for seabirds, but gathering information on these boat trips to subantarctic islands and way out north as well. So just such an impressive effort and something to certainly celebrate from the community. It's just showing how people coming together and working towards collaboratively a shared goal. This next time lapse I made just to kind of show exactly that, but each month as the project progressed. So again, just trying to highlight how quickly and how effectively the community lit up the area with their bird observations. And so it's so cool watching this back, having been so involved with it for the participation and also coordination, and just really amazing to see this. And one of the big messages that we sort of noted at the end and tried to encourage participants when the project finished was like, just keep going, like wherever you are and whenever you're out, please just contribute your bird observations to eBird, because it's just going to continue to help inform bird conservation and research. Something that was really cool as well was looking before the atlas, how many people were engaged with eBird, both users and the number of checklists. And what we saw is once the project started, which is that green arrow, we just saw in some instances like 500% increases in the amount of data going in for certain months. And you get these really awesome peaks in the summer months, so that December, January period, which is also linked to international birders coming over to New Zealand and going and experiencing it. But just so cool to see this general increase, and we want that to continue again. And that's something that we're working on. So I'm part of the eBird New Zealand team as well, just trying to continue to advocate people use eBird for their bird observations. And so kind of reeling back, like, why is this atlas so important? And just going through those points again. So this nationally significant data set is going to provide up-to-date and scientifically valuable information for decades to come, to contribute to advances in science and our knowledge of the birds of Aotearoa New Zealand. We know that birds are indicators of ecosystem health, so they might be able to uncover further things that might not have been on people's radars. And we know that those results are going to have a lasting and positive impact on conservation management, research, and policy for decades to come. And all of that data is one of the many beauties of eBird. It's available to a plethora of stakeholders, including experts, community groups, and that is shown here. This is just some of the organizations, whether it's universities, conservation agencies, community groups. It's all available to them, and they've used it already, which is really, really awesome to see that. And that'll continue once the project finishes, and for people to be able to access that. One of the final things I just want to talk about as well is, and something that we're working with the eBird team to incorporate, is the eBird status and trends. Now, this has historically been really focused on North American species, and I know a lot of people have probably enjoyed looking at this online. I mean, if you haven't, it's all freely available on the science tab of eBird. But as of this year, we have over 50 particularly endemic species that are getting mapped. We're working with the eBird team to go through those. And again, like I said, super exciting to see some of these animations, because they're showing some very interesting and very cool things for certain species. This one is showing titipunamu, so rifleman, relative abundance across the whole country. And this is cutting edge. This is going beyond what was shown in the last atlas. And this is what's really exciting to be able to sort of delve into and showcase for the community. And as I said, myself and my colleagues Mike, Pat, and Sam, we're all working now to review the atlas data set, and we've started writing it up, and we're going to be writing an ebook. Because we want to lean into this sort of online science tab and be able to allow people to click on these species. It'll have your relative abundance map for Korimako and New Zealand bellbird. You'll be able to click on that and it would take you to the science page, because we know that as soon as this gets printed, it's probably going to be quickly come out of date. And so in 5, 10, 20, 50 years, when people click on this, they'll be taken to the most up-to-date information. And that's super exciting for us, and we're really enjoying working on that. And these relative abundance maps are amazing because it's not static as well. They've made some really cool advances where now you can zoom in and explore this. So if you wanted to have a look at the relative abundance of kākāpō, New Zealand falcon here, you can looking. And, you know, if you're in and around Balclutha or Dunedin, it's all very exploratory data. And that's, again, that's just mind-blowing to me and really, really awesome for the community to be able to explore their own data as well. And status and trends is something that we're working on the eBird team as well. I think we need still a little bit more data, because obviously it needs historical data, but being able to pull out, you know, whether species are declining or indeed increasing in certain areas. This one for Mido tomta is possibly indicating that they're increasing slightly on the west coast, but decreasing where it's shown red. And Pohaweta banded shown here, again, showing in the red that there's possible declines, and that's all along their braided river breeding areas, which, again, myself and many others, we've had the privilege of working along those rivers, and they are facing a lot of threats. It's really hard out there for them for a myriad of reasons, as I talked around, but particularly those introduced mammalian predators. And so amazing that people's observations in citizen science or community scientists are contributing to this, and you're able to see that their observations are making a difference. And I think that's one of the biggest things for me, is how empowering this atlas has been for a lot of people. Speaking with quite a few members of the community afterwards, just how excited they were to contribute and see that their observations are making a difference. This animation is something that I always love to show. This is for a migratory species, Pipiwhararoa, shining cuckoo. And it's a sign of spring and summer in New Zealand when it arrives in Aotearoa. It's really known and culturally significant species. And what this is helping to show is the migration. And I say to people, whether it's an amateur or professional biologist, is your observations are helping produce these cutting edge outputs. This is really important, not just for advocacy and education for amateurs and enthusiasts, but if you can imagine this in the hands of international policymakers and conservation makers, and this going into migratory seabirds and shorebirds, this is so handy, because we know that birds do not adhere to human-made boundaries. And so this is really valuable, and this is something that everyone can contribute just by doing something that we all love doing, which is watching birds. And that's what the Atlas has helped achieve, and what's been so amazing to watch. And so I've just got this again, just to sort of show how amazing that was, but I'll skip on and just say kia ora, thanks very much for having me. And yeah, if anyone's got any questions, please do sing out now. But if you want to flick me an email, then please do just do that. And as I said, I'm really looking forward to getting involved more with Rocky Point and meeting more of you and understanding and trying to work with you all. So yeah, thanks so much.